All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and our second to last video on our fourth BCBA practice exam, where we're going through the next set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials. When you pass, let us know so we can include you in our Sunday shout out. As always, work hard, study hard. Let's get going. 171. At the start of every week, a fifth grade teacher rearranges her classroom randomly without much thought. She will change the location of desks, put up new posters, greet the class differently, amongst other variations. If the fifth grade teacher is attempting to program generalization, what strategy is she using? So, when you get programming generalization questions, you should think about that list in your head, right? Things like common stimuli, loosely, exemplars, general case. And then you're going to use those to evaluate the question. Now, what gets tricky about the generalization or programming for generalization questions are some of them feel very similar, right? Programming common stimuli and training loosely, those feel similar. Well, here's the difference, okay? So the fifth grade teacher is rearranging her class randomly, not much thought, and she is changing the location, right? Changing the location of desks, new posters, reading the class differently. All these things that in the long run don't have much effect on generalizing behaviors, right? Just because she's changing the location of the desk and putting up new posters, that's not going to be necessarily effective at generalizing to the home setting, for example. So if she's just changing these stimuli in the environment, but they don't have a lot of impact as far as the actual skill she's trying to generalize, what strategy is she using? A, program common stimuli. So if you're using program common stimuli, if you're programming common stimuli, you're changing critical variables of teaching. So these are the variables that are actually going to really make an impact on that skill in other environments. When you're training loosely, this is what she's doing. These are non critical aspects of the environment, but you want to avoid those non critical aspects obtaining stimulus control. Meaning, we don't want this random poster that has nothing to do with our skill to suddenly obtain stimulus control because it's there all the time. So, by training loosely, we avoid that issue. Indiscriminable contingencies is when the learners don't know when the contingency is taking place. So, this is like when you're fading a schedule or thinning a schedule. And then general case, you're looking at the whole picture and what could impact the behavior in a generalization setting. Since she's not giving much thought to it, she's not really doing a general case analysis. So what she's doing is she's trying to train loosely. She doesn't want these non-critical, and that's the key, non-critical aspects of the environment to gain stimulus control over her behaviors. 172. Marshall starts to notice that Lily will tell him he is handsome more often when he flosses and brushes his teeth. He starts to record each time this happens. What type of analysis is Marshall doing? All right, descriptive, correlational, and experimental analysis. When you see any of these, let's think about goals of science, right? Description, prediction, control, because these match up. When we're in description, right? If our goal is description, we're just describing what we see. Okay. We're observing a single variable, so descriptive analysis. We're observing one variable. We're not manipulating anything. We're not correlating with it with anything. We're just observing it. So if Marshall was just observing every time Lily called him handsome, that's just a descriptive analysis, not manipulating it and not correlating it. Now Marshall says, well, every time I brush my teeth and floss, she tells me I'm handsome. Is there a correlation? We now have these two variables that we are seeing, are they at all correlated? Notice he's not manipulating anything. If he starts to manipulate flossing and brushing his teeth, that's when we get into experimental analysis. So descriptive analysis is kind of like description. Correlational analysis is like prediction. And then experimental analysis is kind of like control. If we're just observing two variables to see if they correlate without manipulating anything, we're conducting a correlational analysis. Only if Marshall starts manipulating flossing and brushing his teeth will he enter into this experimental analysis phase. So descriptive analysis is pretty self-explanatory. Don't get correlational and experimental confused. With correlational, you're still just observing. You're just a passive observer. Experimental, you're actually involved in the manipulation. 173, a behavior analyst who also owns her own ABA company wants to improve the performance of her technicians working in the field. Which of the following strategies would most likely be most effective? Okay, a supervision question, a training question. These can give people trouble. Okay, a lot of new behavior analysts aren't as used to training and being the boss and that kind of thing. But that's a big part of your job, right? So you have to know, how can I train my technicians better? How can I improve their performance? And the thing to remember is the same way you're going to teach your clients to do things and maintain their behavior, you're just using those same strategies on the technicians. So in this case, a behavior analyst who wants to improve the performance of technicians in the field, which of the following would be most effective? So we have to analyze each and think what's going to be most effective at improving performance. A, ask parents to provide feedback on technicians and then give a raise to any technician who gets good feedback. Now, don't jump on this question. All right. It seems like the obvious one, but let's think about it. Think about all the things that could affect feedback on this technician. Maybe this technician and this parent have become very close. Maybe the parent doesn't really pay attention. Or what if technicians aren't interested in raises? We would never say, well, we should give the same thing to every single one of our clients. So we should not give the same thing to every one of our technicians without running some sort of preference assessment. So, A, you skip some critical steps in identifying what's going to make that technician happy. B, observe each technician and write one set of goals to distribute to all the technicians. All right, again, think in terms of the client. Would we take all our clients and write a single set of goals for all the kids? No, we need to individualize, right? Each goal needs to be individualized to the client, just like our goals need to be individualized to the techs. Observe each technician and then create an individual set of goals for each technician. Good. We're actually observing them, a direct observation, and then creating these individualized goals for each of them. D, require each technician to complete a self-evaluation at the end of each month, adjust goals accordingly. Is a self-evaluation going to be enough for you to adjust their goals? Of course not, right? A self-evaluation, very indirect assessment from you. You need to see with your own eyes, okay, what is happening with this technician in the field. A self-evaluation is not going to be enough. So the best course of action here to improve the performance is to observe each technician and then create individual sets of goals for each. 174, a doctor is explaining to a patient that they should not eat 10 cans of tuna fish each day as they are at risk of making themselves very sick, and presents research to the patient. The patient tells the doctor he read that 10 cans of tuna will actually make him feel better and that he feels great. The patient is exercising what? Now, the question is simply asking, what is the patient doing? It's not for us on the exam to sit there and try to judge and make assumptions about it, right? We are here to answer the question. So what is the patient doing? Well, the doctor gives all this explanation. He gives them research, and then the patient says, "Well, actually, I've read, so I'm not going to believe you." Or I'm not on board, right? So what is the patient doing? Well, A, he's engaging in philosophical doubt. We, as part of science, engage in philosophical doubt. We question outcomes, we question research. Until we can repeat it, we question it. So, right or wrong, what the patient is doing. He's doubting the validity of this empirical research of this expert in the field. And he says, well, based on my experience, my research, my outcomes, okay, I'm doubting your outcomes. And so, is it right? Is it wrong? It's not the point. He's doubting, okay, the research, the outcomes. He's engaging in philosophical doubt. Parsimony, the simplest explanation. Well, the simplest explanation would just be to listen to the doctor and the research. He's not being parsimonious. Determinism, the universe is a lawful and orderly place. We're not really looking at that in terms of his behavior here. We're not looking at a determined behavior. And then selectionism. We're not looking at his learning history or his genetic history. What we're doing is watching this patient engage in philosophical doubt when presented with this research and this expert opinion. 175, Sam orders the lobster and tells his son that it is delicious. Next night, the son orders a steak and says, "This is delicious." Later that week, someone asks Sam if he has had anything delicious lately, and he says, "I ate steak the other night." In terms of stimulus equivalence, the last sentence represents what? Okay, we're thinking in terms of stimulus equivalence. We're thinking reflexivity, symmetry, Transitivity. When we get stimulus equivalence questions, my advice would be to map it out or label your different variables. It's up to you, but let's go ahead and do that, right? So we have lobster. Let's make that A, and delicious is B, right? So lobster equals delicious, A equals B. We've got symmetry. Next night, son orders steak, make that C and says, this is delicious. So now B equals C, well, so we have more symmetry. Later that week, someone asks Sam if he has added anything delicious. Here's B lately. And he says, I ate steak the other night. So we have steak equals delicious, C equals B. Anything delicious equals steak, B equals C. In terms of stimulus equivalence, what is that? Well, that's symmetry, right? Reflexivity is A equals A. Symmetry is A equals B. Transitivity is A equals B equals C. We didn't get to transitivity, but we got to symmetry. Steak is to delicious, and then delicious is to steak. So in terms of stimulus equivalence, the last sentence represents symmetry. Map it out, practice these. They're not as intimidating as they might appear at first glance. If you just go through the process, okay, you can get there eventually. And the more you do, the better you become. 176, you are observing your client in a social setting on the weekends. You start to record duration data for time spent talking to peers. For the first hour, you recorded the following data: 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 8 minutes, 12 minutes. What percentage of the first hour did your client spend talking to peers? Okay, a little curveball here. When we're initially reading it, we think it's going to be really just a duration question, right? Because we're recording duration 5, 10, 8, and 12. But the question wants to know the percentage of the first hour. So we need to decide, well, is this during the first hour? If we've read carefully, we know the data is based on the first hour. So we need to figure out what percentage of the first hour did your client spend talking to peers. So how do we find that? We just need to find a percentage. And you have to know how to find percentages. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to add up all our data. We have 5 plus 10 plus 8 plus 12, and then divide it by the total, which is 60 minutes. And we're going to get what? Well, we're going to get 58%. The client spent 58% of their time talking to peers. This is an easy question on the surface, but you've got to read carefully. And then you've got to know how to find percentages. You have to know how to find averages. You have to know how to find percentages. If you're uncomfortable doing those two things, right, you need to take a little time to get better at that, okay? Because those are the easy ones. You don't want to miss those on the exam. 177, you're grabbing drinks with your friend who is also a behavior analyst in the field. She has significantly more experience than you, so you often talk about your cases together. Today, you're discussing with her a particularly difficult case that you're having issues with. What must you make sure you avoid? You are allowed to discuss cases with other analysts, but we have to be sure of what? Well, we've got to be sure we protect the dignity and, of course, the privacy of our clients, okay? We don't want to reveal anything, right, that could show somebody else who we're talking about. So if we're going to go get drinks, right, and talk about our clients, our cases, what do we need to avoid? A, you should not reveal any identifiable information about the client to this other analyst. Absolutely. Nothing you talk about should be identifiable, right? If they're not on the case, if they don't have consent for that information, you can't share it. B, you should avoid talking about the client in public places at the risk of revealing sensitive information. Yeah, this is a real thing, okay? Especially if maybe you live in a smaller community and people know each other and they talk, and you don't want someone overhearing you talk and identify who you're talking about and then go tell the parent. It becomes a mess, right? So if you're in a public place, that might not be the best time to talk about these things, okay? You don't want people talking about your personal things around other people. Our clients are the same way, right? They're still people too with rights to dignity and privacy. C, you should only discuss the client and not discuss details about the stakeholders or their daily lives. Basically, this is saying don't gossip, right? We don't gossip about stakeholders and parents and whatever, right? And that's hard because we're human. That's what humans do. But got to try to avoid that as much as possible. It's very undignifying. It's unethical. It's not professional. So if you're going to talk about your cases, you can't reveal information, avoid public places, and then only discuss that client. What are you going to make sure you avoid? All the above. And then finally, 178, kind of a teaching question. The first course of action when confronted with an ethical violation that has not directly harmed a client is to do what? So this is kind of an unknown, right? What do we do first when we're confronted with an ethical violation that has not harmed a client? If the client's harmed, right, that's a totally different story. That is, now we take very aggressive action. Let's just say we have an ethical violation. Somebody's using testimonials when they shouldn't be or misrepresenting themselves. Small ethical violations. What do? What is your first thing you do? A, report the violation to the BACB through their website, phone, or in writing. Before you even do that, okay, before you give this to the BACB to hopefully get them involved, you need to do what? You need to attempt to resolve the issue with other parties involved. They might not even know they're engaging in ethical violations. So you should give them the benefit of the doubt, present your case. If they don't resolve it, then we can go ahead and report it. See if the violation has caused no harm. Wait and see if the violation resolves itself before getting involved. Absolutely not. We don't wait and see, because what if the worst happens? And then D, it is not your business to get involved in other ethical violations unless it directly impacts you or the client. Well, as a BCBA or BCABA, it is your role to uphold BACB code. Now, we've got to remember, the ethical code only applies to the ABA practitioners. So if you're contracted, you're working with other people, they don't have to adhere to our code. Remember that, right? You see somebody else doing something, but they're not a behavior analyst, well, oh well, right? You can still talk to them about it, but they have no obligation to our code. So the first thing you want to do, if we have not harmed a client, is to attempt to resolve the issue with other parties involved. All right, check out behavioranalyststudy.com for our study materials. Our last exam 4 video will be next week, and then we'll be on to our next one. As always, like, subscribe, let us know when you pass. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.